Not that much, broke my license like me, but.
Okay. Oh, jeez.
I got your. I didn't see nothing. I got no-
Just been sent out to his body.
It's pretty funny when the same.
Yeah, that's good.
Steve now.
Already.
That's up to you.
Well, I figured Jason would have a blue shirt on like he usually does, and I figured he'd wear one, but no, today's brown.
It's warm.
It's warm in here.
I got one or two, put it down a degree if you don't like it.
Hard to open the windows, eh?
It's funny because earlier we were here, it was cold. So, okay. Yeah.
It's at that time of year, it's up and down.
Yeah.
9 degrees.
I might even have two of the doors closed at the back and the temperature in here, then I can. If that door open, you're starting to, the other door opens and stuff, but.
At least you can hear.
So we will move forward with our agenda, calling the meeting to order. It's November 14th at 3:45. So this is a special meeting of council to receive a presentation from Hutchinson Environmental and JL Richards on the Trout Lake Water Quality Study. And so I turn it over to you, Mr. Scale, to make introductions and we'll go from there. Oh, yes, that's so true. I forgot. Yes.
Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councilor Champagne. Deputy Mayor Rikers, that the draft agenda presented to council for the special meeting and dated the 14th day of November 2023 be hereby adopted as written.
On favor? Wrong, carry, yes. Oh. That's on that note, any declarations of conflict of interest or pecuniary interest thereof? There being none, we will now move forward.
Thank you, Mayor Rockford, and I'll turn it over to Greg. Greg's got an introduction ready for council as well as, after today's presentation, what the next steps are. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks. Okay, so as Mayor Rockford said, we have Jason Berrigan from JL Richards and Brett Parsons from Hutchinson Environmental to give a presentation to council this evening. So as you're all aware, this has been an ongoing process where we're reviewing water quality in Chile. Looking at it from a variety of different angles, doing data collection and analysis of that data, and then ultimately making recommendations for potential planning changes in our planning documents, as well as making best practices, ways to administer those financial mechanisms. We're at the point right now where you'll hear from them in the presentation that we're ready to kind of move to the next step, and the next step will be drafting some of these actual policy changes and having the policy amendments to our official plan, zoning bylaw. That will go through our planning committee and ultimately council for approval. The goal of tonight's meeting is to give you all an update on where we're at, give you an overview of the analysis that was done, both from an environmental science perspective and a land use planning perspective, and answer any questions you have about the process and get somewhat of a general consensus on how to move forward and I guess your endorsement with moving on to the policy drafting basis. So we're not looking to make any determinations, decisions on any policies tonight, except for just a general view of the drafting. So with that, to Jason and Brent and
Welcome to the representatives of the North Bay Manawatu Conservation Authority that are here. What?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's a great pleasure to be here with you this evening. I think the last time Brent and I were here was completely, so it is always so much better to be here in person. Council sort of understand the work that we've been doing several years, your staff guidance, those staff and as well as the city. So very pleased to be here on behalf of JL Richards and Associates this evening, and joined by my colleague Brent with Hutchinson Environmental Sciences. As Greg mentioned, our intent this evening is really to give council on what we've been doing since we were retained on the file in 2021. And I should sort of say there's a considerable amount of really do appreciate council's patience with the study within the last year. As council knows, there's been several significant changes to Ontario's planning system that the provincial government has been implementing as it attempts to grapple with these challenges that we face as a province. And some of those changes have directly impacted the study. It has impacted the timing. So if it pleases council, we have we'd like to sort of say it's a very short presentation. We have different ways of doing that. Some longer, some shorter. I'm hoping we came for shorter too. So I'm going to sort of kick things off. I'll turn it over to Brent, who's going to walk council through the science behind the land use plan. So dates that will undertake the capacity model, and then sort of what that means in terms of future development. And then Brent will turn it back to me, and I'll walk you through very sort of briefly high points to release the results of our analysis of the land use planning from and the ability of the framework to protect water quality within Shoreline. And not to give away the punchline to the story is the framework is working for you, recommending some adjustments to that. So to kick things off, if I go to this page down.
You can actually, yeah,
Just take page down.
or across or side, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. So as council certainly knows, Trump Lake is a wonderful asset for residents within these areas for many different reasons. Obviously, it's a drinking water source and it's an important recreational asset. And as council also knows, and as we're going to sort of describe it this evening, municipality these fairs together with the city of Bay have been doing a good job. So water quality within Trump Lake for many decades. Now, when we look at the history of the file, it's been about 30 years since the lake was looked at in a very comprehensive, both in terms of updating the national capacity assessment model and then also the land use plan. So the study that we're here to present tonight, really, if you want to think of it in a way, you're thinking about your land use planning policies as a service to the residents that you provide. What this study is giving you the opportunity to do is pause and reflect as a council around how well those policies and that service level is working. And then in addition to that, what changes or what needs need to that policy framework as part of the municipality's continuous process. So the study itself was divided out into sort of 4 distinct phases, and I won't go through the 4 phases in detail, but generally it's a standard planning process. The first phase we're described as the understanding. So our intent in that phase conceptually is we're trying to wrap our arms, our head around if we need to understand study or the particular issue. The second phase was the directions phase. So after doing the homework, a little bit of reflection, we put some tentative ideas on the table. So public stakeholders, based on the feedback that we received, we reflect a little bit further, we do a little bit of work, and then we affirm them. So that's the phase that this evening, as Greg indicated earlier in his comments, the next phase of the process, subject to direction received from council, will be to move into the implementation phase. That's really what you get into the project development. And so, so that's setting the stage. I'll turn it over to Brent to talk about some of the science, and then I'll come back and talk about the planning piece.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Brent Parsons. I'm an aquatic scientist and an owner of Hutchinson Environmental Sciences. I actually went to Nipissing to do my undergraduate degree, and I did a focused study in 3rd year on Treadle Lake 20 years ago. So kind of neat that it's come full circle. In that intervening 20 years, I've focused on lake management in the province. A lot of time spent with this lakeshore capacity model. And I don't know about you, but I have found the more I know about something, the more I kind of notice the limitations on certain things, as especially in terms of models in general. So I like to look at what I like to call multiple lines of evidence to look at how a lake is doing and try to determine development capacity, not just based on one model. well. So one of these lines of evidence is measured water quality. There was a bit of measured lake water quality. So we gathered that water quality data from historical and more recent data. And we did a big synopsis and a background report, which was the first deliverable for my part of the report, and completed that in June 2022. So the big highlights of that report are the bullet points on the slide. So historical and more recent water quality data indicate that the quality in Trout Lake is excellent, and nutrient concentrations are low. We often look at total phosphorus in lakes. Many of you have probably heard of that before. That's typically the primary limiting nutrient for the growth of plant and algae. So we looked at that. There's no trends in total phosphorus over time. You can see on the bottom right, that's a graph, just phosphorus concentrations from all the different sites. And the historical sampling sites are shown on the map. There actually is a slight decline over time, but the trend isn't significant because the data is really noisy, especially between the years of about 2008 to, I believe it was 2012, when a different lab was used. You can see since that time, the data is still really low at 4 or 5 micrograms per liter. That's really low, and it still looks like it's slightly declining. Also through that synopsis, we determined that the water quality in 4 Mile Bay and the main basin of Trout Lake is different, both in terms of phosphorus concentrations and dissolved oxygen, which were two of the primary types of water quality we're looking at. Now, Trout Lake's unique in that there are actually municipal water quality objectives for those 2 parameters, for total phosphorus and oxygen, which is really rare. It's not something I'm aware of anywhere else in the country, to be quite honest. Or municipality have those. Typically, it's just a provincial or a federal water quality objective. So we did note that there were a few exceedances of those municipal water quality objectives. But again, when I started to look deeper at the data, I didn't really have a lot of confidence in those findings. So the exceedances of phosphorus were oftentimes these years where you can see a different lab was used. And the data was all over. It'd be the lowest on record and then it'd be the highest on record the next year. So I think that was a problem with the lab. And I think since that time, the data, which is now being analyzed at the Dorset Environmental Science Center, is more representative of the conditions of the lake. We also noted a few exceedances of the dissolved oxygen municipal water quality objective, which is 8, and so we want it to be above that. And when I looked at that data a little bit more closely, we noted that a lot of the data was interpolated beyond certain depths. It was just estimated what that was. It wasn't actually measured, and that the depth, like the maximum depth of the measurement, changed quite substantially over years. Like 1 year to be quite a few meters less than the next year. So there were some exceedances, but overall the water quality looked really good. And I think those exceedances were more a function of the lab that was used or the way the data was collected. Regardless, we came up with 6 different recommendations to improve the water quality monitoring program in the lake. And I have those actually on the last slide that I can go over it, but primarily to increase the types of water quality parameters that are analyzed, like calcium and chloride, look at road salt, things like that. And just to ensure that annual monitoring reports are completed every year so that we can say, well, how's the water quality doing? How is it trending over time? How does it compare to the municipal water quality objectives that are in place? So those are kind of the big takeaways from the first report, which was based on the measured wastewater quality. So the next thing we got into was the lake storm capacity model, and those results were completed in a report. The next report, existing conditions, issues, opportunities, and constraints report. So that report built on the findings of the background report and was completed to examine best management practices for waterfront development, and it looked at development threshold calculations, again through multiple lines of evidence. So this model works by estimating phosphorus loads from a variety of different sources, and that's the output on the right you can see. So it estimates phosphorus from septic systems, that's the top, based on different occupancy rates, calculates phosphorus loads from precipitation and watershed runoff. And it uses all these sources to predict the concentration in the lake. And then you compare the modeled concentration that you predicted with the one that's actually been measured over time. And then if it's within 20%, then the province says that the model's working pretty well. You can use it to assess capacity. The model actually worked quite a bit better than that. It worked, we predicted phosphorus concentrations in the main part of Trout Lake and the main basin within 6%. And then concentrations in 4 Mile Bay were predicted to be within 11. So we were able to use the model to determine capacity with a fairly high level of confidence. So the way we do this is we come up with water quality objectives. The way the water quality objective works for phosphorus is you actually use the exact same, but then you take the load from the septics out, and then you predict what concentration was in the lake before anybody was on the lake. So that's your background concentration. So that would have been it. Or that's what we modeled it to be, prior to colonization. And then we add 50%. And then the idea is that you can increase phosphorus to that level through the provincial framework of the lakeshore capacity model. In this case, if that value happened to be higher than the municipal water quality objective of 7, then we didn't use it, we used the lower one as part of a conservative approach. The one thing that's the most difficult and subjective part of this model is the phosphorus retention rate. So when the model was completed back in the 80s, it was assumed that all the phosphorus from the septic went to the lake if it was within 300 meters of the lake. And that is just not scientifically correct. And you actually see this in the model quite a bit. And that's what happened when the Ministry of Environment ran this model a few years back, is they assumed that, but then the model highly over predicted what the phosphorus was in the lake. So the model couldn't even be used for management at that point. So I made a couple changes to the model, which I believe were in error previously, but one of them was inclusion of a retention rate for phosphorus. So this is always a difficult one because it sways the way the model works. But we know based on a plethora of peer-reviewed scientific literature that most of the phosphorus actually get bound up close to septic systems, typically over 90%, especially on the precame green shield soil. So again, that's why I like to look at other things when we're trying to determine development capacity, because to me, the septic is not the only stressor you have on the lake. But if we're going to use this model and municipalities are going to defend their findings in front of municipal boards hearings, then this scientific point needs to be included in the management. So we selected a phosphorus retention rate of 86% based on local monitoring, which I believe was still quite conservative for a variety of reasons. And when we actually did a sensitivity analysis to show, well, how does the model work at different retention rates, we found that it actually worked best at 97%, which is the same number we often see in peer-reviewed literature. But we did less than that, again, as part of a conservative approach. So we found that the model values of phosphorus shown in the table on the right were less than both either the provincial water quality objective, which I mentioned was the background plus 50%, or the municipal water quality objective of 7. So on the table, you can see for 4 Mile Bay, the background concentration, so the concentration in the lake, if there were no septics on it, was modeled to be 5.18. The provincial water quality objective, so 5.18 plus 50% is 7.77. We didn't look at that because it's higher than 7, and we already have a municipal water quality objective of 7. So we just set it at 7. The existing modeled phosphorus of the lake right now is 6.25. So since 6.25 is less than 7, there's that room in between that shows you there is some capacity. Similarly, for the main basin of Trout Lake, background 3.76 plus 50% is 5.64, and the existing model concentration was 4.84. So we have some capacity in terms of the lakeshore capacity model. So,
what do we do? And this is when we started talking to the team. Well, a lot of people are, well, first of all, we need to build out existing vacant lots of record. What does that get us to? And then we actually converted all the seasonal lots to permanent occupancy, which is a higher phosphorus load, to see what happened there. So that still left us below the municipal water quality objective or the provincial water quality objective. So then that's when we started talking about different proportions of the capacity that was shown. And the ones on the screen are from 20% of the capacity that we calculated. And it's worth noting, and I think Jason will speak to it a bit more in his part, is that I think the majority of these lots are actually, that could potentially be available for development, are not waterfront lots. A lot of them are on inflowing water courses. And again, the way this model has been traditionally used over the last 40 years or so is that any lot that is within 300 meters of any inflowing stream or the lake counts the same. But again, that's not scientifically accurate. Modeling, you have to take some assumptions, and that's one of them. So I do have a whole section in the report on what the differences of impact would be on an inflowing stream versus the lake itself, both in terms of the septics, but also with other impacts, whether they're recreational impacts or damages to shoreline vegetation, things like that. So the other layer that we worked in was, well, what happens if you increase the phosphorus? Well, I'll back up a step. And theoretically, as you increase phosphorus and you increase algae and plant growth, as that algae or those plants decompose, the bacteria in the process can lower oxygen in the lake. So that's always a concern, especially in lake trout lakes, like Trout Lake. So we can actually model the changes in the oxygen based on the changes in phosphorus that we predicted. So at the changes of building out the vacant lots of record, the conversion from seasonal to permanent occupancy, and the development of 20% of this maximum capacity that we calculated, I calculated that there would be a maximum change of 0.17 milligrams per liter in 4 Mile Bay. And the change in the main basin of Trout Lake was 0.1. So again, those multiple lines of evidence. Well, what were they? I'll summarize them all in the next slide, but a couple of them were based on what we call recreational capacity. And these are, the first one has been used by the Township of Saginaw in the past to determine how many lots should be allowed on the lake. And it's just simply one lot per 1.6 hectares of lake surface area outside of the 30-meter near shore environment. So we looked at that. We also looked at, well, how many lots would you have at 60-meter frontages on the lake, which is typical metric. And from that capacity, more of a social density or a boating recreational capacity, found that there was actually no additional development capacity on 4 Mile Bay following these recreational capacity metrics, while there was on the main basin of Trout Lake. There were also a number of uncertainties with lake management, and those are only increasing in the face of climate change, unfortunately. So again, those are described in the report. There's also some uncertainties associated with downstream impacts because Turtle Lake and Lake Talon have been deemed to be at capacity by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. I found there to be a few inaccuracies with those assessments or some assumptions that I think should be tested a little bit. But that has been stated by the provincial agency. And there's always uncertainties associated with the implementation of best management practices. So in conclusion, to summarize these various lines of evidence, when we look at measured total phosphorus, there were some exceedances of the municipal water quality objective in 4 Mile Bay and none in the main basin of Trout Lake. But again, those exceedances in 4 Mile Bay, I think were variability associated with laboratory processes. There were no exceedances of the provincial total phosphorus water quality objective, and there were no trends. When we looked at oxygen, there were some exceedances in 4 Mile Bay of the municipal water quality objective. Again, there were some problems with that data. They were heavily interpolated, but there were no exceedances of the provincial water quality objective. The lakeshore capacity model showed that there was capacity for lots, And then the recreational capacity metrics were mixed. So there are best management practices that are have been shown that can be highly effective to mitigate the impacts of shoreline development. One of those that are properly designed and maintained sewage treatment systems. As I noted previously, septic system phosphorus is largely attenuated in pre-Cambrian shield soils through absorption and mineralization processes. And we actually have some monitoring data from Eastview Estates septic system monitoring, and that some of that monitoring has shown that those systems have been highly effective. But again, there's been lots of literature based on more traditional septic systems and how effective they've been as well. Shoreline buffers are extremely important. They're biological hotspots that provide a wide variety of ecological services, including improvements of water quality, both through wastewater, improvements to wastewater or stormwater. And 30 meters is commonly recommended as a shoreline buffer size in peer-reviewed literature, and that aligns with provincial guidance. And erosion and sediment control can be used to reduce short-term impacts from construction and long-term impacts from stormwater. So we reviewed a large variety of site plan agreements on Trout Lake that were required as part of these minimally developed or minimal impact lots, and a lot of them have included, a range of these suitable best management practices. And the key with any best management practices is the ongoing education and enforcement of them. So I had a variety of environmental recommendations. These are kind of the highlights. There's a few more in the report, but the main ones to improve the water quality monitoring program were to increase the number of water quality parameters, standardize the dissolved oxygen data collection and analysis so you can track that bottom mean volume weighted dissolved oxygen over time, that lake trout habitat, and compare those data with the provincial and municipal water quality objectives annually. The downstream impacts from development applications on Turtle Lake and Lake Talon should be modeled. Septic, we noted a few problems with septic monitoring at the previously approved minimum impact lots. Those monitoring programs should be carried out the way they're intended. And I think a wholesome list of best management practices should be applied to all new development, and best management practices should be encouraged not just on future development, but also on existing lots through education, stewardship, and enforcement. There's a lot of existing development on Trail Lake that we heard a lot of complaints about through the consultation process, but it wasn't in keeping with best practices. And then I also think that the study should be completed in the relatively near future, 3 to 5 years, just to continue to see how the health of Trout Lake is trending, determine the effectiveness of the best management practices, have them be implemented and enforced, and check on the progress on the recommendations. I think a shorter time frame than what was completed previously would be important, considering the importance of Trout Lake for the community.
Awesome, thanks, Frank. I always learn something new when I listen to Brent do this part of the presentation. So we'll turn our attention briefly now to the land use planning framework aspect of things. So both Brent and his team are looking at the water quality data, they're monitoring, they're remodeling, like thinking about their recommendations. What we were doing at JLR was trying to understand existing best management practices, which is what this slide summarizes. Then we benchmarked your practices against a municipal comparator group, so it's very important to do within the municipal industry. And then we've analyzed both your policies in comparison to North Bay's policies and have come up with some recommendations. So the slides that I'll present summarize that analytical process. So as I sort of said, this slide shows the land use planning tools that both North Bay and East Ferris have in place today. And I won't go through these in detail, but when you look at the numbers and go back and forth between the two columns, what you'll sort of see is there's a very good symmetry, largely between the two policy frameworks. There are some differences between the two, and that's okay. Municipal councils can create policies that they think make sense for their communities. I'll talk about those differences in a second. The second thing that we did once we understood your policy framework is we went out and we looked at, I think it was at 9 different municipalities, including 2 upper tier municipalities, with each had about 5 or 6 different lower tier municipalities within that governance structure. And this was documented in the issues, opportunities, and constraints report that we had issued several months ago. And as I sort of, what this slide is indicating is that the practices that are in place in East Ferris today to protect development along the waterway flowing streams are generally in line with municipal approaches. And so again, if I go back to the service level comment that I made at the outset of the presentation, if you're benchmarking your service level, you are in line with your industry peers. And as Brent has already said, the one thing that did stand out to us as well was East Ferris's adoption of it. That is certainly within the province of Ontario, certainly something to be celebrated. So from a benchmarking perspective, the approaches that we use today are consistent with the competitors. So thinking about those 2 pieces and then working with Brent and his team and with staff in East Ferris North Bay and Conservation Authority, thinking about this from a land use planning perspective, there's 5 things that sort of jump out to me. I want to touch on those 5 things now, and I can get into the land use planning recommendations a little bit in more detail in the next slide. So the first point, obviously, and we recognize that this is a different conclusion than what the community has considered previously. But what Brent's work has demonstrated is that Trout Lake is not active. So for many years, East Ferris and the city of North Bay have employed precautionary principles for that question. So the model was not previously working really well. There was no data to make policy decisions on. So choices were made to implement a precautionary approach for the freeze, basically, within 300 meters of the lake. The modeling results suggest that the lake is not. But as Brent mentioned, there are some uncertainty in the other lines of evidence that Brent has explored, particularly recreational carrying capacity. I think the climate change is obviously a big one, which a lot of municipalities are beginning to sort of grapple with still. And I want to be clear with the recommendations. As Brent mentioned, the capacity model allows you to model a maximum threshold of development. We are not here to recommend that you take the lake to its full development capacity. Instead, what we're recommending is that East Ferris, together with its partner, continue to follow a very measured and precautionary approach to permitting new development within something that we'll touch on in a second, we're describing as the Trout Lake. So again, trying to balance the desire for additional development with the community. And then I can't help it as a planner, but when you're looking at 2 policy frameworks side to side, there's a natural tendency to sort of say there's opportunities to create some consistencies here. And that's what I think. So in terms of the land use planning recommendations, we've outlined several recommendations in our directions report. And like Brent, I'll touch on what I think is the most important piece. So we do think looking at the policies in East Ferris should sort of given the neighborhood development and given how climate change of it as issue and a topic is very prominent today. We do think that there's an opportunity to go back and policies and think about climate change, what it means in the context of East Ferris specifically. Given the modeling results and again reflecting the conservative approach, we do think there is an opportunity to update the municipal water quality objectives for total phosphorus. We're recommending that the water quality objective for dissolved oxygen stay the same. It's good where it is. But there is an opportunity to update the water quality objective for phosphorus. And so what we're recommending is a hybrid approach. So for the main basin, we would move towards the background plus 50, which Brent had previously described, which is in line with provincial direction. For 4 Mile Bay, what Brent was doing the modeling, because the modeling results took 4 Mile Bay over the 7. We don't want to go in that direction. So we're recommending to keep the standard for 4 Mile Bay at 7 micrograms per liter, again, reflecting a very conservative approach when thinking about new development. So the concept of the 300-meter setback from the shoreline is one that is very well, I think, understood in the community, is understood in the city of. And what we're recommending in our directions report is, given the fact that the lake is not at capacity, council does have the opportunity to consider whether or not you wish to continue to promote creation of new lots within that 300. So what we're recommending in our directions report is to do away with that restriction, and in place, you create something called the Trout Lake Influence. So this would be very similar to an aggregate overlay in your official plan, so it isn't a land use designation, but it's almost like a caution here. It sits over top of the rural land use designation. It's in a schedule so that when somebody comes forward with an application for consent, say, sensitivity of that area and the relationship between them, it's flagged. So everyone knows to proceed with extra level of care in this area. So that Trout Lake Influence overlay would apply to all lands within 300 meters of the shoreline, the major flowing streams in the northeast and south. The fourth recommendation is on the model results. We do believe that based on the scientific evidence, it would be appropriate to permit this amount to lots within the Trout Lake, subject to the conditions that are listed here. So as Brent sort of mentioned, and as I've sort of said, we're not here to recommend that the lake be brought to its full capacity. But understanding the modeling results, what we're recommending is that a number of lots, which is equivalent to 20% of the model capacity, be permitted. So what that means is 83 new lots be permitted within the main basin. And we broke that down between East Ferris and North Bay based on the percent of land area within the Trout Lake Influence overlay. So 33 of those lots would be in East Ferris. That's the council accepts that recommendation forward. 50 of those lots would be very similar to the minimum law framework that has existed for many years that came out of that historical decision. In 4 Mile Bay's case, what we're recommending is up to 20 new lots be permitted. And with a major notation that includes 20 lots, not only on the shoreline within the bay, but the major inflowing streams of 4 Mile Lake, which all feed into 4 Mile Bay. And as Brent mentioned, we're beginning to sort of do the work to begin to understand where that lot creation potential is. And all indications at this time suggest the majority of lot creation potential is away from the shoreline. So it isn't directly sort of on itself. So we're also recommending in our directions report that all new lots on water be subject to enhanced setback and shoreline buffer standards, as I like to sort of recommend in this report. This is one of the things that we had to go back and look at, given the changes to the planning act that were enacted last year. At one stage, and we've addressed this on our second addendum, at one point within the last year to year and a half, the government passed a bill which removed municipal ability to impose site plan control on residential development projects 10 units or less, I think was the threshold. And with that change, really our recommendations, which go back to 2002, were rendered invalid because they were premised on the use of that tool. A few months later, I think in response to government feedback, the government went back and reinstituted site plan control for residential projects 10 units or less, provided that they were within 120 meters of the water. So we, as I mentioned in our addendum report, went back and modeled what that comparison North Bay. And the good news is 90% of the lots within the Trout Lake are either partly or wholly within that 120 meter area. And as we've described in our addendum, the way that the legal framework is now set up, so council does have the ability to continue to impose site plan control on parcels of land that are partly within that 120%. Obviously, there's going to need to be some judgment that gets applied if you have a lot and 1% of a lot is located within the 100 meter setback versus say another lot which may be 40 or 50% within the 120 meter setback. Around should site plan be applied in this case, or we really can't do anything in that instance, but from a policy perspective, the 120 meters continues to move forward. We're also recommending that council continue to prohibit future new lot creation. beyond the 20% that we're recommending until the lakeshore capacity assessment is updated again. So again, council has the opportunity to pause, collect new data, reflect on how well things are working before making its next series of policy choices. And of course, all of this is supported by the on-site septic system monitoring frameworks as well as quality monitoring. As we went through this process, staff asked us to consider sort of 2 policy questions specifically around additional residential units and, sleep cabins and bunkies as they're sort of more common. What we've recommended are directions where after looking at it and comparing policies to other municipalities and councils continue to prohibit additional residential units within the Metro Lake influence area overlay, because that can pose a very significant stress on existing septic systems. But we are recommending that sleep cabins and monkeys be permitted within that area subject to certain conditions. And the distinction between the two really is, one is designed as a living dwelling unit than the other one. So it doesn't have the same level of services and needs. And then to continue with our final few recommendations, we are recommending that councils consider the opportunity to update and create minor variance policies to reflect administrative best practices. So looking at the documents, there's some opportunity for things there. Looking at one of the municipal precedents that Brent and I are very familiar with, we have a lot of experience working within this community. So a little bit potentially of a gap within your policy framework. You do have the ability to implement some additional flexibility. So individuals that own what are known as buildings. So these are buildings that have existed in the landscape for some period of time. Council has implemented a zoning bylaw to continue to permit the use or residential land use, but maybe the setback changes or lot coverage changes. When that happens, and those policy changes, with whatever exists on the ground doesn't relate to the policy change, that then becomes what's. And the Township of Georgian Bay is point this out in our directions report. The Township of Georgian Bay has a very sophisticated and mature recognizes those, allows minor modifications to those buildings, depending upon their distance from the shoreline. So the farther you go away, there's more flexibility. Either extend the length of the building, its density, and what that means is that people don't necessarily have to. This is for smaller things they're looking to do if they're looking to extend sort of. Again, as I've alluded to, we are recommending that all lots within the Metro Lake influence overlay within 120 meters of the shoreline be subject to site plan control. So that's anything adjacent to the lake or adjacent to the stream. Is where that would apply. And that both municipalities obviously continue to use best management practices as they implement site plan control. And again, I'll go back to my consistency. Can't help it as a plan. We're looking at sort of 2 different things. There is an opportunity from a practice perspective to align the 2 site plan control frameworks a little bit. But beyond that, I think the framework that you have today is serving the community quite well. So with that, Madam Mayor, I didn't realize the lights would go off. That's okay, we'll go there to give us some illumination. With that, as we realize that is a significant amount of information, we've had the opportunity to think of this for 2 years. And we know that hasn't had the same level of big opportunity to consider this in an in-depth manner. So we'll start later, Madam Chair, and we'll have to take any questions. Absolutely.
Councillor Graham.
Just one more comments and else. I wish we had had a copy of this before the meeting and we had an opportunity to take a look at it for some of the questions. We probably would answer ourselves. You keep saying, it's the lab that made a mistake. Keep saying that all the time. Are you sure that's the lab or is it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not, so there was changes in minimum detection limits too. So yeah, it's the lab that's used now in the Dorset Environmental Science Center. It's like notoriously accurate data. That's the one that Mr. Environment uses. So whenever I see data that's like the highest on record and the lowest on record, it was all used at one lab, that was being used for 3 or 4 years. Yeah, I wouldn't trust it. Because one thing we got to remember is the phosphorus concentrations in the lake are really low. Like when I'm talking micrograms per liter, that's parts per billion. So it doesn't take much from instrumentation to throw things off, part or two per billion. So I trust the data that's been collected since 2012 quite more. And when we did the historical data review, like I looked at everything I can find. So we had reports going back a long time, and the findings were always that, you know, water quality was not trending in the bad direction. You know, you can go to maybe site specific things that might have happened in the lake, but I'm talking about general health conditions over time.
Yeah, it just bothers me so much. I think it was. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, fair enough. No, I haven't. Yeah, I don't know how that data.
I've got 4 questions. Where was the testing done for septic systems on the model? Had one of it seems to do, which was North Shore Road, right? Where else was it tested?
So a large number of those were monitored. I think we've looked at 30 different. Well, we got monitoring data.
So it's more than 1 or 2 than.
Oh, yeah, it's a bunch, yeah.
Because I don't see that information, so if I seen it somewhere, then that's the question.
Yeah, fair.
And you see a lot of people are getting their water from the lake and also have a septic system. So that's a concern, I guess, right? Make sure that stays, especially at our side of the lake, which is down by stepping stones and that. I think that's the only area that we have an opportunity of really opening up. If I'm right, basically Johnson Road area and that area is only really open land and tap that's available. So people are still going to be getting water from the lake. They don't think they'll be drilling wells. So the next part of that question is the septic systems are going to be used. Who's going to approve what system's going to win? Is that going to go through the Conservation Authority?
Yeah, I mean,
And is this going to be approved ahead of time, like before the lots are given? That's a certain septic system that you're going to use for these lots.
yeah, so one of the recommendations was that, you know, systems be utilized that are shown to be, well designed to attenuate the phosphorus. So, but yeah, when it comes to actually permitting the systems, it's continuing to be the Conservation Authority.
I just don't want to see a monopoly on a certain system that's going to get done and all of a sudden one system's approved, but
I agree. I actually did one of my recommendations was, so there's a few tertiary systems. There's an EcoFlow unit, there's a Waterloo biofilter unit. Those are the 2 like kind of more unusual ones that show that they retain a high proportion of phosphorus. But honestly, just a traditional septic system using the right material, like, you know, the horizon sands that are pretty high, like pretty red, they have higher aluminum and iron, and those themselves have been shown to be really good.
Yeah.
So,
you talk about that one, which is Hutchinson Sand, which I installed one.
Yeah.
I installed a couple.
okay.
But and now they're talking about this class M sand, which is a floor. Go through that also. But you know, it's good to know that then. Well, that's the part of my question is that. At the end of the day, when we do create new lots, the Conservation Authority really won't have any say in what's going on. It's going to be us, except for the septic system, creating new lots. Did I get that right? Which I don't like. That's falling on our lap, but unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that. It's time. 110 units. Right? I guess if I would have a lot of these ahead of time, are we going to get a copy of this? Is it possible to get a copy of this so we can look at it and? Yeah, because we're counselors and we can forget real quick what we're looking at. So opportunity to really look at it.
Thank you, Councilor Champagne. Councilor Pat.
I just want to go back to the shoreline buffers. You said North Bay was 30. And East Ferris was 60 meters. Why would there, like, why is there the difference between 30 meters? Like, is it? I'm not sure. Like, why? Yeah, go ahead.
And that's what because we did on council on our own. We put the setbacks further than what North Bay was because we wanted to, you know, save our water more than anything else because we a lot of people drag from the lake. Right. On the other side, the North Bay, a lot of them get well, not wells, but they're on water, right? So they don't have as many wells as we do. So we're protecting ourselves is what we looked at.
Wells. Rick answered one of the, or asked one of the questions. The other one was the Trout Lake Influence Area Overlay again, the 300-meter shoreline protection. I sort of kind of got it, but you lost me a little bit on that.
Yeah, I think when I got into the aggregate example, it probably muddied the waters a little bit. So if we're to look at a map.
Right.
So you, in this Ferris, you have, it's 4 or 5 streams. So the Trout Lake Influence Overlay that we're recommending, you would, in land use planning terms, which is different from a land use designation. So land use designation is where you're signing something like. An overlay is sort of saying, hey, this area is beyond, say, the residential. So what we're recommending is that basically through GIS analysis, you'll basically buffer. And then you buffer the inflowing streams and introduce that into a schedule and new official plan. So then as people are coming along, you know, in the future, we've had that.
Yeah, like we have the 300-meter setback already, right? We have something along that line.
Yeah. We have a prohibition today.
Yeah.
Which is basically in line with provinces. For Trout Lakes that are at capacity, and so what your policies effectively say is you can create a lot within the 300-meter area, provided your septic system is beyond 300 meters. Right. Or your septic system is somehow draining into another water body that is outside of the 300 meters. And so that, I don't want to speak for Brent, but I know is that we've been having these discussions, and you have to draw a number somehow. And I think council understands this in planning, when you're establishing a designation. You're putting the lines. On one side of the line is going to be people who can develop, and on the other side of the line is people who can't. So the 300 meters was selected, I think but the science is demonstrating that 300 meters is likely. And you know, there's a lot of folks in Ontario who sort of will ask, what's the difference between 299 and 301? In terms of the placement of your septic system, you know, so it's enough to get into that sort of discussion. So looking at the evidence that we have, we're more comfortable relying peer-reviewed studies that Brent has mentioned, and the model results, because it presents a series of outcomes that are specific to Trout Lake and specific to your communities, versus a sort of a generic policy principle that is being applied right through.
Right. Just the one question. I remember back in, was it 2021? I think you guys came back and did a presentation of some sort or whatever. There was some sort of dispute going on with regards to, correct me if I'm wrong, Terry and Mary, wasn't there like some sort of math equation that was?
It was a ratio.
Yeah, a ratio that was, you know, in dispute with another group, and as well as how did that, and then Rick brought up with regards to the labs and all this stuff. Like, I'm just wondering how all this came about and where it has landed, and this is actual, the equation of the benchmark of 7 is actually like where we should be at, and because I know there was probably going to get some residents asking us, so I kind of want to arm ourselves a little bit. So I don't know how you landed with this equation, and then, like I think you were saying that it's a provincial equation that you used or whatever. So I just want to ask that a little bit.
Yes, specifically, well, I guess to back up, yeah, so the 300 meters was selected by my master supervisor and my first boss when they came up with the model. And it wasn't selected based on anything other than we need a number. Let's go with about 1,000 feet. That's how it got entrenched in policy. And you know, so it's a pretty conservative, and again, like Jason said, it doesn't make a lot of sense. All the phosphorus from the septic goes to a lake, 299 meters, and none of it does. It's 301 meters. But again, models have these limitations, right? And that's just the reality of them. But to your specific question on ratios, I don't know specifically what the point of contention was. It might be this phosphorus retention rate.
With regards to like the phosphorus with regards to the equation. Right?
Yeah, so the phosphorus again, so that's why I just, you know, tried to put it right up there in the model, but yeah, so that. So the province says you should just say it's 0. And there should be no retention. So then they did their model, and if you say it's 0, the model doesn't work, it over predicts it. And then, more and more studies that come out show that phosphorus is retained, especially in Precambrian shield soils. Like the most extensive one that was done by, his name is Will Robertson, professor in Waterloo. He looked at 23 different septic systems throughout Ontario, and regardless of the age of the system, an average of 97% of the phosphorus is retained in the soil within 10 meters of the bed. So it's hard to do the model without some level of retention, right? Both because you want the model to, well, if we're going to use it as a management tool, but also it has to be reflective of like updated scientific understanding. So, and then what number you pick that's the tough thing. So if I'm going to go look at one lot and see what the impacts are, we'll do a bunch of testing on the soil in that lot. When you're doing a model that includes hundreds, thousands of residences, you just can't. So you have to look at soil mapping. That's why I did a sensitivity analysis on the model to show, like, if you put in, 90% retention, it actually models really well. If you put in 97, it predicts perfectly. But I tried to do a somewhat conservative number of 86 because that's what we saw on the monitoring. And the monitoring, the one thing we got to remember in this monitoring too is that doesn't even account for all the retention that would occur between the bed and the lake through the 30-meter buffer or whatever. So again, it's an assumption, it's built in, it's important, but again, I put a lot of time into looking at soil mapping and trying to come up with the best number that I thought was appropriate.
So there's not a regulation or a provincial regulation with regards to the equation. It's basically what works best for the area.
Yeah, it should be. So it's just a number that you plug in the model and it says, okay, this much phosphorus from the septic is retained. Yeah. Yeah, that's the gist.
Any other questions?
I'm good.
That was a good question, yeah. I'm not sure. I think I saw Deputy Mayor react.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. And Councillor.
I went through, because we didn't get a report, so I went through, I think, June 2022, you had right? So, and as you mentioned, Bill 23 has come into play.
Yes.
And so when you were talking about in the last year's presentation, 348 lots could be potentially created in that overlay area, right? And so your best experience, would that be, could Bill 23 building homes faster, say you have to build all those homes? I guess I want to know what the impact of Bill 23 would be with this.
So we appreciate the question.
Okay.
So the impact really is, so the market will decide, and working with council around how many at the end of the difference between the Bill 123 and this Bill 1. After all, some planning, I'm starting to lose track of the change. The bills go. So the concern was the government site plan control. Two of those big lots are all three. Then it was actually in response to feedback from where a lot of them government went back and reinstituted changes. To the government and said, hey, do you know that we use site plan control to protect the environment? So that led to the reintroduction of, but let's sort of assume that, I don't want to speculate on this, but let's assume that 348 is what the change between those two sets of legislation means is that 90% of those lots or whatever number of lots can be created. You can still use site plan control to investment. So it doesn't affect the lot creation potential. It affects how you manage the risk. And between the two changes, you're fairly low.
did you ever look at, like, one thing that I've been, is blue-green algae and things like that? Is that with phosphorus that increases? Did you look at that in?
Yeah, we did.
Right, okay.
We looked at, there wasn't a ton of information on algal bloom, just because there's a lot of algae growth in the lake, just because the nutrient concentrations are so low. But we did look at some historical information from, based on fluorescence, it estimates the amount of algae. And we looked at chlorophyll A, which is a surrogate used to assess algae abundance. So we did look at both of those. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, there's a low biomass in the lake,
Okay.
sure, yeah.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you. And Brunel, Councillor.
Sure, thank you. Has there been any consideration of the impact of the Algonquin land claim? And why I mention it, East Ferris may be greatly impacted by the Algonquin land claim, especially in that area. Because there's a big subdivision being planned we've been following quite closely for about the last 15 years. And there's a large subdivision being planned at the end of Johnson Road that I've seen. And they're talking about giving back to the Algonquins portions of the Mattawa Conservation Park there. And we've had it on fairly good record from long-term residents that there's times in the spring when the lake actually goes back up towards to Turtle Lake. So if there's effluent and there's problems in that area, it's going to impact the main basin because it's going to be downstream come early summer, middle summer. I'm just wondering because it's a large subdivision being planned, and I'm not sure what the implications are as far as their being ability, how close they'll be close to the water.
Through you, I think maybe I'll take the first pass at that and I'll look to Greg to supplement. So it is, we appreciate your raising, it is an issue that's come up in the process. So our understanding is that whatever development does occur in the future would effectively be treated as private land as we understand it today. So it would be subject to your local municipal planning. So it would be treated just like presumably every other application that goes forward and would be assessed according to the official plan policies that would have an effect either today or at some point in the future in your zone. Of course, we work in the official planning framework where if an individual has a vision which differs from council's vision around what the community should look like, they do have the right to make an official plan amendment supported by a full range of technical studies that the municipality would require. Council would have an opportunity to look at that information, to consult with the public or around that change, and then sort of make a decision. So I would say that your land use planning framework will help sort of dictate that outcome either now or some point in the future.
Yeah, sure. I can add something. Thanks, Jason. So what Jason said is absolutely correct. My understanding of the land transfer and future development, they would be treated the same as any other private landowners would develop, and would need to apply to the municipality with all the studies that they would require and go through the same process. So council will be able to review. One thing I just wanted to add to Bill and Jason's comments, for the purpose of the Trail Lake study that we're doing, and also the critical studies we put on the lake and the lake system. The dividing point between the lake is actually just to the west of where our boat launch is, like the Thursday. So all of the shoreline lands that are part of the plan are part of the Turtle Lake system, Mattawa River system. So they're actually not part of like this case study that's part of this study and haven't historically been considered part of Turtle Lake by the province either. And all of the land that's part of the land back from the shoreline is almost all outside of the area that would be part of the Turtle Lake influence area, because very little of it touches influent streams. That being said, the Mattawa River system at Turtle Lake is currently deemed at capacity. So any shoreline development opportunity as part of the plan is on a water body that's considered at capacity, and would have to have septic systems further back and an additional development capacity capacity that may or may not be granted through this review or trail lake policies would not be applicable to the shoreline rights that are available.
So it would not, so you're looking at basically, this is saying that there's capacity for 103 lots right now, new lots. And you're saying that development towards Turtle Lake would have no impact on 103 lots.
Different study.
Same water body though.
Right. Well, so the Mattawa River system in Turtle Lake would be considered downflowing streams, and some of the recommendations that we saw earlier are to continue to study those water bodies and see if there are impacts. And we actually do have policies in our fishery currently that require us to look at that, and the conservation authorities have helped us significantly with the monitoring programs. But that's something that we already study. So the development potential on Turtle Lake would not be impacted by any development plans.
Okay, thank you.
Any further question? Good time?
No, that's it. Thank
That
you.
was a good question as well. Maybe it's a good time to ask our planner, with the recommendations that have been presented to us, do you have any concerns with respect to how it impacts these fairs?
Yeah, no, I think it's overall a good thing. So from my perspective, one of the things that we always need to make sure when we're looking at our policies and considering development is that we have policies that are in line with like appropriate science and evidence that supports them, and that we have policies that we're able to adequately defend if needed and implement properly. So one of the worries that we spoke about with our base staff is where we have a policy that's existing right now on very shaky ground, or there's not modeling data that works properly. What happens when we get a development proposal that comes in and then we say recommend against it based on policy that's not sound, and then we end up having to defend these at the provincial tribunal. Then you almost run into a situation where you have provincial tribunals and development applications determining our land use policies rather than us proactively implementing policies that make sense. So no, I'm very supportive of it, and I think that Jason and Brent have done a great job with putting the time required in to understand it. And I would much rather have policies that are supportable and have basis in sound data rather than kind of continue with stuff that's very shaky.
Well, if I may interpret your comments, there is then some subjectivity that's being introduced into the planning process. When we discuss the overlay, in terms of the overlay, and then it means that you then have to have committee members that are supportive of the recommendations that you put forward and your conclusions. Would that be fair?
Well, the subjectivity part, I think that probably comes more into play where Jason's talking about more backlogs from the lake. When it's right along the shoreline, there will be no doubt as to what policies and frameworks are being applied. So I think that will be more clear cut. I don't think there will be a ton of process. It should be well documented, and the goal is to bring a very comprehensive report and comprehensive set of policies to our planning advisory committee and back to council, and you'll have a chance to review and comment on those if you generally support the direction to go forward with developments.
The city of North Bay, when this first was presented, were completely, they put it on hold, I guess was for lack of a better term, would that be a fair statement? I'm very glad we have Mr. Adam Curran here as well from the city of North Bay with us. I believe we're first to see this report before the city, is that correct? What is your sense, if we may ask you, in terms of how the city of North Bay will react to this report? I'm sure you've worked through issues, but nonetheless, how do you feel it will be received?
Don't want to speculate on where a council will land on any particular item. But we're hoping that it'll be received with great interest. We're hoping to get some really good questions from North Bay Council.
There have been significant changes from where there were concerns from the city of North Bay in terms of what you're bringing forward.
So in terms of our report, certainly the directions report, the changes to the report are relatively minor from the version that we presented. It was really just about assessing the site plan changes, making sure that we had the right recommendation for that.
If I may, Mayor Rochford, one of the recommendations, I believe, was either updating or doing a trail lake management study. Can you touch base on that?
I had that in there, just that the last time it had been like 30 years. And again, I don't think there's like any slam dunks with from what I saw, right? It's like, okay, the model shows their capacity. There's more impacts than septics. You know, measured water quality looks good. And we know that these best management practices can be effective, but you know, we're getting algae blooms in lakes that have no development on them. You know, things are changing pretty quick in terms of lake management. You know, I know for a fact that the province is thinking about, you know, changing what tools they're going to use. So I just think that, you know, in 3 or 5 years, you know, depending on how planning policies progress, there should be a check-in to say, okay, has the monitoring improved? You know, have the recommendations been followed through it, you know, or have new tools been introduced that should affect, you know, the path moving forward.
Who did that study 30 years ago? In terms of, is that a city of North Bay? Was it jointly done? Conservation Authority, Paula? Thanks. Okay.
If I may, I think what Brent's suggesting is that we redo this process in 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
Just a quick comment, question, Councilor Trahan asked earlier how we come up with the 300 meters. It just kind of came back to me and Paul will attest to it. It was the Liberal government, Calvin Wynne, painted everything the same brush that we had to be 300 meters from any stream or creek anywhere in the north. Until we explained to her, we have cattle, we have farms, that you can't have a septic system any closer, but the cattle can do their thing in the field and go to our rivers. And that's when we came up with our 300 meters and said, okay, we'll protect our lakes, but you got to change your way of thinking. And that's what happened. So that's going back a few years. So she was a mess for environment then. That's how we come up with 300 meters.
But you're not looking for any resolutions from us, and but certainly I think council, we're all interested in seeing the report. It is difficult but to your point, I mean, it is similar to 2022. I think that's good that you went back to read it to Deputy Mayor Lackers. And so, but on that note, we will look for the report and read it. And so anyway, so what is it? So please explain to us that, I think you did explain the process, but just go back over now. What are the next steps?
Sure. So next, we all start on to Greg. Next step is traveling to North Bay, to North Bay City Council, the same sort of findings. I think Mr. Curran has a staff report on the agenda tonight. He's recommending that council give staff direction to proceed with the official plan amendments and the zoning bylaw amendments, which would be the next step. So the real decision will be around changes to the official plans. So we'll see how that goes this evening, and based on the feedback we received here and later at North Bay City Council, then we'll continue to take the direction from staff.
Yeah, we're doing this same process. We'll get a copy of all the reports related to council, and then I'll bring a report to the next meeting, just recapping what we talked about tonight, and then we'll look for official direction on proceeding with the amendments, which will take time, and if we move forward with amendments, those will be drafted in the coming months, but the planning advisory committee and
That's all. In a way, you know, I know we often like to read before, but in a way now we've got an understanding, and so when we read it, we'll read it with maybe more understanding. So in that sense, that's a good process. So thank you for. Any further questions or comments? So on that note, we are ready to conclude our presentation. There's no recommendations. So we would like to thank both Hutchinson Environmental and Dale Richards for their presentation. We also thank the North National Conservation Authority for their presence and the City of North Bay for their presence as well. So on that note, let's proceed and close the meeting.
I have a mover and seconder, please. Councilor Kelly, Councilor Trahan. But we do now adjourn this meeting at 5:00 PM.
In favor? It's all, Council Champagne in favor? We're now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Appreciate it.